all the time for all of our problems. But we cannot also deny the fact that the reason for most of these problems are also caused by our leadership. The sum total of a nation, the sum level of growth of a nation is dependent on leadership. The day a nation loses leadership, that's the day it starts to scatter. The first way the West underdevelops Africa is through the greed of African leaders. It's through the greed of African leaders. And the greed is not today. The West knows what they want from you. They want raw materials. They want raw materials. And they want to be able to tap in to the rich raw materials. So the things they look for are leaders that are ready to give the raw materials for free and for their own greed. So the very first thing they do is to dangle money at the faces of African leaders. Because they know that that money, once they show it to you, because you have a very poor mindset and you're quite very corrupt, you will go for the money rather than developing the prospect of your people. So what does the African leader do in the end? He goes for the money, he becomes very corrupt, and once they dangle money at him, all is over. So he sells the resources for cheap, not realizing that actually if he uses his head to develop that resource, truth is, he can make more for the African continent than whatever money they're giving. And I'll give you a clear example. A country called Guinea has bauxite. Bauxite is used for making many things. Then China sees that Guinea is poor. So what does China do? They go to Guinea and they give them a loan that is 2 times their GDP. And when you give somebody a loan that is 2 times their GDP, what you have done invariably is you're taking their minds away. Once that happens, Guinea starts to struggle. Because number one, they have unfettered access to the bauxite. But the second part of it is Guinea struggles to pay back the loan. And once you struggles to pay back the loan, you'll enter what we call the debt trap. The debt trap is something that a lot of these African leaders now use to keep us perpetually where we don't want to be. So once a country like Guinea gets into the debt trap, it is constantly a rat race, and they never get out of it. Because the debt trap is not for you to be able to get out of. The debt trap is for you to be able to stay there so that they can constantly perpetrate your poverty. So the truth is, once they get you into the debt trap, really do. All your mineral resource that if you had developed, that you'll have used to create jobs and enablement for your society, then becomes something that causes you pain. Because in the end, once the debt trap sets in, then there's not too much you can do. All you just do is you start to wallow in disbelief at how your fortunes have been lost. When you do that for the next 20 years, all the things that you ought to spend on development is spent on waste and trying to fight cases in courts. The first time when they came to you as an African leader, all you had needed to do was to be able to say no, that you were going to look for partners to be able to develop. But once you collect that loan, because you want money, then forget it. And that's how they perpetually keep Africa poor. Number one, the debt of the the greed of the leaders. Number two, the debt trap. Once they put you into the debt trap, and that's it. Number three, they also use a lot of non-state actors. So if they really want to get all of this resource, and they look and they say, oh, they cannot get it, the next thing is to use a lot of non-state actors. Non-state actors which also involve a lot of greedy businessmen, a lot of greedy people within, intensify efforts and cause chaos among themselves. Because in an environment where there's chaos, where there's lack of peace and tranquility, we'll have no development. So once they can successfully cause this chaos, then they manipulate people against each other. And that's why you start to hear things like crude oil theft. The theft is done in total connivance with other superior powers, looking at also the greed of the people you have on ground. Because they know that most of the people within the system cannot really fight out the greed. So once they know that, they capitalize on the greed system that a lot of people have, with causing chaos and causing wars. And how do they cause these wars? They go to look for the fault lines you had before. So take, for instance, if two tribes had a problem, and the two tribes are fighting, they go and exacerbate that fight in such a way that you think is a tribal war, but really it's a mineral war. And they use that fight to be able to take over your mineral resources. Truth has to be said. If you fall for this, then it's the beginning of your problem. Also, they go out there and start a new wave of colonialism. Another new wave of colonialism is in the gifts they give you. They give gifts to be able to get into your goodwill, but in the end, there's a long-term gain as regards what they truly want. Truth is, nothing is really free in life. You have to understand that. The reason why anybody gives you something is because definitely in the long run and the grand scheme of things, they want something also in return from you. So if you think it's because they love you so much, that's why they give you these gifts, then you are the one that is foolish. Another way they are able to capture your mineral resource is your election processes. Do not be deceived. For every election process you have, there's an interference one way or the other from external powers. Everybody wants to determine who will be your next leader, because if they can determine who will be your next leader, so that they'll be able to do things that favor them alone. So when your people start shopping for who is going to be the next leader, the very first thing they do is that they offer to provide money for elections and campaign. Truth is, the Nigerian law totally frowns against money coming from abroad because of foreign interference, but the truth has to be said. There's a lot of money that comes from external forces and that gets into the election cycle. Everybody out there wants a stake in the pie. So all sorts of people are trying as much as possible to influence the outcome of every election. So once they can get a hold of your electoral process, then to a large extent, they can also get a hold of your leadership process. So how will they do it? They have all sorts of agents within that are tackling and that are trying to get across to these people. Another part of it is also using, a lot of proxies. Proxies that mask as people that are coming to help, but they also have an agenda. And in all of this, they cannot be successful in all of this if your leaders do not show, number one, a level of greed, number two, a level of ignorance. Because if your leadership shows a level of greed, they will be able to capitalize on the greed. If it shows ignorance, they'll be able to capitalize on the ignorance. Another way that they're able to take off your resource is when your leaders have a bad past and they have secrets and debt on your leaders. It's another very important part. When they have secrets of your leaders or they have debt on your leaders, then they're able to manipulate. To a large extent, even in the American elections, and I'll take you way back to the 30s, do you know that Adolf Hitler had a lot of senators working for him to be able to tilt the electoral process in the 1940s elections when Weldon Wincke ran against Roosevelt? Do you know that there were many senators that were communists in nature, beg your pardon, that were backing Wincke because they thought he was going to do the bidding of Hitler? And these were people that preached a high, and they thought they were going to do the bidding of Hitler. So from time immemorial, people are constantly trying to look into the electoral process, trying to be able to enter into the psyche, trying to be able to enter into the mindsets. And the way they can do this is they see rich resource within your continent and they look for collaborators. Also, they also capitalize on people that can sell their country for anything. There are many people out there that for them it's all about money. There are many Nigerians out there that they are agents of people in the foreign lands, that they use all sorts of things just because of their own selfish interests to spy on Nigeria and be able to give information out. So we also need to be careful. But all of this, it can only be possible when you have a leadership that doesn't think and it's not circumspect enough. Truth has to be said. All of these things are part of the ways at which other nations of the world infiltrate your democracy, infiltrate your system, infiltrate your gathering system. Also, another way they infiltrate is through technology. Truth has to be said. If you as a nation does not develop your own technology and you are totally dependent on the technology of other nations, then definitely they are going to be infiltrating you. Do you know how much data that people have of Nigerians from different apps, like the apps in which you used to take loans? You forget that once you register your data on those apps, it doesn't go for free. Even most of these mediums that we are using here to be able to talk to you has data of millions of people. And you see, in the new grand scheme of things internationally, it will be a data warfare. Data is more important than anything. And increasingly every day, you are so quick to share your data. We are just so quick to share your data. The truth is, they've taken our data and they know too much about us. So when they know too much about you, it's easy to be able to take you on. Have you ever wondered the fights that other nations of the world are fighting as regards technology and all of that? Because they know that the part about technology also is that you should be able to look deep. Because if you don't look deep, then they take your data away. And that's why we also must encourage. We too should have our own Nigerian-made apps and applications that are doing the work for us. We too should be also able to have a proper communication Nigerian-made app. And that's why every time the other day, I was always supporting this man that owns Naira Land. And I just hope we can improve upon it and we can build our own ecosystems too. Because if you don't, then you fall short on scale. And data is everything. So when you look at it deeply, another way they're able to get into your systems is data. In all of this, the greed or the ignorance of the leader is a greater tool. Another way they're able to get into your system is in contracts and agreements. Contracts and agreements. You also recently, when the state government, Ogun State, went to sign a contract and agreement, and the truth is, they couldn't go to the end of that contract, and this Chinese company sued them, and now they're beginning to take Nigerian property everywhere. Contract and agreements matters a great deal. The question is, before you sign the contract and agreement, you must be able to look at it so well that you look at the interest of your nation. The truth is, if you don't look at the interest of your nation, you will fall into the problems like we're falling into now. You know, that the Ogun State government has created for Nigeria in general. That they are now taking most of our resource in other parts of the world. How can we solve this problem? We need to be able to look into contracts and agreements. Contracts and agreements. If you don't look at the contracts and agreements, then you will never go anywhere. Also, be careful of the international agencies you take money from. If you take money from somebody and you lend money from somebody, definitely you are in the claws of that person. If you don't pay back, that person can do anything to you. I'll tell you a quick story. China's debt to Zambia became so much that it got to a stage, a lot of dailies in Zambia had to start publishing their papers in Chinese. China could take over most parts of Zambia because the Zambians were not watching. They were just so concerned about the loans. But the truth is, when the loans came back to bite them, it had become a big problem. And to get out of it was already problematic for them. So they couldn't go any way further. And if they couldn't go any way further, they couldn't introspect, and it was already a problem for them. I'm currently reading this book, and I'll show you this book. It's about Prime Minister. In fact, I finished it. The Prime Ministers in the UK. It's about the stories of, most of all the Prime Ministers, written by Steve Richards. And the truth is, I was reading there even how the UK was very careful about the IMF in the 70s. In fact, I think it was Harold Wilson, when the UK had some financial problems, they too were careful about the IMF and their conditions, lest they get into problems. So if countries like the UK in the 70s, by the recollections of this book, were careful about the IMF, then we too, we should look strongly. Because you see, all of these people, they'll give you a blanket prescription. The question is, does it really work for your economy? Does it really fix the problems you have? Might not really fix the problems you have. What are some of the problems we have? We have problems as regards of trade. We don't export enough, so we don't earn a lot of dollar. And how are we able to do that? We should be able to do that by improving on our gas, improving on our manufacturing sector, improving on our software and application for young people, improving on our solid minerals, to look for places where we can get more solid minerals, to be able to not even just get solid minerals, but be able to make products of them and export. So the question is, why can't we have our own battery processing plants here that will make batteries? Correct me if I'm wrong. At some point in the 90s, I remember in Ibadan, there used to be a team called Excite Packers. They were the team of Excite batteries. And they were in the second tier. I'd seen a couple of their games. And they will make batteries out of this place. So the only way that can get you up there is a great manufacturing base. But how can people manufacture when the tariff for electricity is high, the business environment is very tough, there's an unstable rate? Okay, anyway, there's some stability now with the dollar to the naira, but the rates are very high. So we cannot produce enough to be able to stabilize the cost of our economy, and there's a lot of problem. And I'll give you an instance. Do you know, just one company that produces a drug in Denmark, Novovac, the popular drug Ozempic, they make so much money now in dollars back to the Danish economy that they use that money to be able to stabilize the value of the Danish krona against the dollar. So we need to be able to improve our manufacturing here. How can we ensure that we get more revenue for manufacturing? I mean, these are the questions we should be able to ask. And that's how we can stop the West from constantly taking over from us. Nigeria have a lot of talented young people. How can we harness those young people to be able to build this country? How can we set up hackathons? How can the government also say, we want to fund the next tech companies, rather than go and buying technology and software from Israel, why can't we put that money in the young people here and see how they can develop it? Take for instance, I'm going to play an interview I had with a powerful young man called Nord, Toby, that makes Nord cars. Toby was telling me that he has already designed the prototype of a car that can be a presidential car in Nigeria. That if it's given the chance, he can make that car in 8 months. I'd like to encourage President Tinubu, why don't you buy from people like Toby, buy from people like Innocent, buy from people like Jet Motors. Promote these people. Anyway, we congratulate you and FIRS for buying from Toby, buy a couple of cars, but the presidential car should be Nigerian made. Rather than going to buy the American car, the Cadillac that was about $1 billion, why don't you buy, from all those young people within? Because that's how we can grow the economy. And that's how we can stop the West from ripping us off. See, everybody has an international agenda. After the Second World War, there was a rallying of meeting. The Bretton Woods Conference happened, where you had Britain sit down with America. And Maynard Keynes, that was one of the people that negotiated on behalf of Britain. He saw that Britain had lost the economic trajectory for the next 100 years after the negotiations favored the Americans. All right? After the negotiations favored the Americans, and the trajectory of the economy for the next 100 years was set after the Bretton Woods Conference. So all of these conversations matter a great deal. The question I'm asking you today is, will Africa be able to set the trajectory for the next 100 years? If we want to do it, we have to do it by producing our own, developing our own. It's not going to be about concentrating on the West. How can we start from within? How can we grow our ecosystems? And those are the conversations we should have this morning. 081 099 1991 0818 099 1991 0818 099 1991. This message is going live across all platforms: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and the likes. Call me up. Let's have a conversation on the future. All of these things, I'm telling you, it's possible. It's possible. And if we can start from our own local ecosystems, it's possible. Take, for instance, what I'm doing with the Oseni Center. Now I'm trying to partner with Educare to be able to get, students to be able to do exams online so that they can prepare for their terminal exams. Hello, how are you doing? So all of these things are possible. It is possible. You can actually do it. We can get it done. It's not impossible. It is possible. And if you believe that, then you start to walk towards the possibility of this thing. Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Bless you. What's your name? Where are you going?
My name is Obania. I'm from Lagos.
Speak up, Aguna.
Okay. My own decision, before this thing we hold, is when there is resolve. Because it's sitting on a schedule. All this thing now, some people hate what other tribes do. For example, if they say that Igbo may produce something, and they say that this one is from Igbo, maybe. So we can't dialogue. They say anyhow what they establish.
Thank you so much. So we need to get decisions right, also by our leaders. That's it. We need to get decisions right. 0818 099 1991. And that's why all the series we're putting out here on impact with Rufai Oseni is like, be able to open up your mind. Today we talked about how the West is underdeveloping Africa and what Africa can also do in return. How Africa can open the eyes of the future of its continent, and what we can do to ensure that a whole lot more can be done. Can be done to be able to increase the prospects of the African continent. So these are the questions: 0818-099-1991. Hello, how are you?
Yes, good morning, Rufai Oseni.
Great to have you.
Yeah, my pleasure here. My name is Shola. I'm calling from Ibadan.
Great to have you, Shola, from Ibadan. Talk to me, sir.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the platform.
Yeah.
Actually, the topic you're bringing in today is something that's very important for us to consider. And I believe that we can actually begin to have a level of impact when our leaders begin to be strategic and deliberately willing to be known for being influential in the world. We are relegated as soul or religion to that which is subject to the dictates of the West. And just like for example, I used to say that some of the problems we are having even in our country today, attending to food scarcity, the hunger and all, is a platform for our leaders to begin to side of being strategic and showing to the world that we actually know well exactly what we're doing and what we plan to do to correct the problems that we have. So far, we have seen the government real out plans that are actually not reasonable enough to take us from where we are to where we want to be. And some of the things personally that I would have suggested that would in the short run begin to correct the prices in the market that have gone wild is for the government to begin at all levels to distribute seats to anybody who is interested. And this, well, in a way, will even begin to encourage us among families to begin to gradually cut down the prices of food in the market.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you for this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. 0818-099-1991. A lot of calls and messages coming in from everywhere. And he said something very profound. Mass agriculture across board. Mass farming. That's one thing we should be looking at. Hello, how are you?
Hello.
What's the way you calling from?
Yes, this is Lucky calling from Yaba.
Good to have you, Lucky.
Thank you. I'm privileged to talk to you this morning.
Thank you.
I normally watch you at Arise TV. I watch your program, all your program. Because of you, I'm not going to church this morning. I've got to church. I must listen to this program today.
Thank you.
A quick one is about Nigerian property decision by China all over the world right now. So what are we going to do about it? Because Ogun State is just a state in Nigeria, and it causes problem in Nigeria as a federation. So what our government is doing about Ogun State as a state in Nigeria, about collecting the monetary revenue.
And that's a good question because the governor that was in charge when that thing happened should be called to ask questions. It's not just him releasing messages. He should be called also to account. If he doesn't account, then we cannot move forward as a nation. And also, Nigeria as a nation, I want President Tinubu, actually, because this has not become a diplomatic matter. He has to go to China at some point to go talk all of this over, because all of this has to stop. Secondly, I want Nigeria now to review the 2001 treaty we signed with China on trade, because Nigeria is obviously not benefiting from that treaty. And it's based on that treaty, that's where they decided that if anybody goes into business with the Chinese, it is deemed as the Nigerian states. So that's why Ogun State was not held. It was Nigeria as a country that was held. So we need to be able to look at that firmly. we need to be able to look at that family. So those are the solutions. So I want President Tinubu to go to China to be able to go and interface with the leadership there so that we can settle this once and for all.
Yeah, Mr. Oseni, formally, I'm not introducing myself, but my name is Mr. Not People Go. So what my second question is about what you said about patronizing Nigerian products. You give example of some scamming cards that's not produced. Can't you make it as a law in this country? That every one of us, lawmakers from state and federal.
It's already a law. I think it's something called Article 5 or something. It's already a law in one of the procurement. I think it's a law in one of the procurement laws, but enforcement is always the problem. And you see, Nigerians who are the ones doing Nigerians. I remember they bought Inoson for some lawmakers somewhere in the east. They were refusing it. So we need to be able to enforce it on them. In fact, I was talking to Nord, and he was telling me that some of the commissioners, when the governor of the settings they wanted to buy for them, said they don't want. How will you say you don't want a car made in Nigeria? You must insist on them and force it down the throat of the commissioners. And that's just it. So that's just it.
This is leadership failure.
Yeah, because most of the commissioners are the ones that say that they don't want the Nigerian made, that they want Toyota. I mean, what is see? And these people fail to realize that at a point in this country, Toyotas were not popular. In the 70s, 80s, Nigerians were not driving Toyota. They were driving Peugeot. They were driving Peugeot in the 70s, 80s. It was after a period of time that Toyota now became. I knew people that used to reject Toyota. In fact, one of the first brands of Toyota that Nigeria started accepting a little bit in the 80s was the Toyota Crown. But then if you drove Toyota, people would just look at you and it was either Peugeot or Volkswagen. So, but after some time, Toyota became acceptable. So how can we now make Nigerian cars acceptable if we don't accept them from start? So some of the governors actually want to buy, but their commissioners are saying that they don't want to drive Nigeria. I'm like, the governor should say, shame on you, and please ensure that you drive it.
100% right of whatever you said or what I said is already, because we have to take everything to the leadership of the head. For instance, you are the one that is governors or president that employ commissioners and ministers. I cannot employ you and you tell me the kind of thing you want to use.
My brother, I get that point, and it's very apt, but it's also, not that easy. Because some of them will not use the car. There's a lot of lacks in our leadership, and that's why many things we need to get right. I'll give you an instance as we wrap up, because another people are calling, and not only you on the line. I was with Nord, and Nord was telling me that there's this particular breed of type of his car called Nord. I drove in that car recently. I took a test drive in it, and guess what? That car, when they were just like your Land Cruiser, well equipped and everything. When lawmakers were going to spend 160 million on Land Cruiser, that car was just 60 million naira. Then they could have bought that Nigeria, which is equally even of almost your quality as your Toyota Land Cruiser and everything, but they will not go for that. So that's why we need to build this country from within. Hello, how are you? Hello. Hello.
Hello. Good morning.
Hello. Morning.
Hi, Mr. Rufai. Good morning, sir.
Good to have you. What's your name?
My name is Franklin. I'm calling from Abuja currently.
Good to have you.
Thank you for what you're doing today.
Yeah.
So I want to be specific. The problem with where Nigeria is headed, the National Orientation Agency is my problem. Now, I know when I was a kid, our parents did a lot to, make us realize that good name was better than wealth, and that's what has kept me to. I've had the chance of doing one thing. I've got involved in, working at an oil company where you have access to steal crude oil and sell and make money. I didn't do that, and that was simply because my parents taught me some things. The Nigerian youths and the young people and our country do not have a direction, and then there's an agency that's supposed to do something. Teach us how to live with each other, organize programs, visit this.
So recently, let me speak for National Heritage Agency. There are many things I started pushing for recently. In fact, I interviewed their DG, and many things will have to change, because I personally started the Vanguard for National Heritage Agency to change. At first, they talked about the budget. In fact, the budget was so small. The budget was just a little over 200 million. 200 million cannot buy you ads for 3 months on the top 3 TV stations in Nigeria. It can't. So the budget was so small. But probably now with the advocates, they're going to increase the budget. And also, we're also calling them, to be able to partner. In fact, I personally, as an individual, with my platforms on Twitter and the like, partnered with them. I started retweeting most of their messages. And I've constantly been in talks with Larry Issa Onilu, my very good friend and brother, that's the DG of the National Orientation Agency. So with more work, they will be able to bring back those value systems and push those messages. Thank you so much. I mean, it's very hard.
I believe that, first of all, we have to agree that Nigeria is one country. And the only way we can get that done is if everybody, I've been fortunate to have traveled around, the northeast, southwest, been around all the corners. And I can see that Nigerians are loving people. Nigerians are nice people. They just need to know how to live with each other. They live in this thing called Nigeria. And then we'll get all of the other progress would come. If we believe in Nigeria, first of all, then we'll work towards the progress of our country.
Bless you, my brother. I really appreciate it. We got a lot of people coming, and that's why we're partnering and collaborating. There's a man we partner with here, Manjem Pharmaceutical, even Ambassador Musba, we partner with him. There are many things, that needs to be that we try to do as much as possible here. Hello, how are you? Hello? Morning. Can you speak up? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Sheffield, calling from somewhere.
From where? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello, sir.
Morning, what's wrong?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, what's your name?
Good morning, sir.
What's your name? Good morning, I can hear you.
I am Mr. Madu, sir. I called you last week, sir.
Okay.
I told you about my needs, and I didn't hear anything from your end, sir.
Mr. Madu, these things take time. You've given your number out on air, so just don't worry. If you've given your number out on air, you just have to keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best.
Okay, I should read it out, sir.
You've given it out last week, so don't worry. Just keep your fingers crossed.
Okay.
Thank you. Hello, how are you? Hello? Okay. So we just need to make things work, and we need to make them work effectively. And that's why we're doing a lot of work out of the Oseni Center. We're doing a lot of work across the country as much as possible to help in the mindset of people. Hello, how are you?
Hello, good morning, Mr. Rufai.
Great to have you. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, this is Manjem calling from Abuja.
Oh, my brother, how are you? How's it going?
We tried calling you last week, but the network was so bad.
No, it's not a network. It's not a network. There are a lot of callers. There are a lot of callers from all over the world. A lot of callers. How are you? How is your outreach work going on in the north?
Yes, we thank God. I did last time, 2 weeks ago, that we're going to have a medical outreach at Kefi in Nasarawa.
Yeah, how did that go?
That will be till September 18th. So it's going to be a 1 week medical outreach to look at and support the other villages like Takalafia, Afinkwara, all those areas.
Oh, bless you for that.
Yeah, so we thank God. I really appreciate your effort using your media platform to reach out for Nigerians to speak out.
Please give them your number, please. I want them to support you as much as possible. Please give them your number. This is my brother, please. When you hear his number, support him. He's doing so much great work in the north. He's helping a lot of people. Manjem Pharmaceutical, bless him so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
090.
Yeah.
66.
Yeah.
83.
Yeah.
36.
Yeah.
27.
Yeah. Again.
090.
Yeah.
66.
Yeah.
83.
Yeah.
36.
Yeah.
27.
Bless you so much, my brother. God bless you.
I want to say something. By the grace of God, I was able to register a foundation, Icon of Hope and Support Foundation.
Yeah, you told us that last week. Yeah.
We want to use the opportunity, mostly in the northern region here, a lot of children has what we call river blindness or CRC. So we need support from people one way or the other because the foundation is majorly for the, like got the title missionary for the poor, just for the poor. So it's not for people in the urban area, it's for people in the rural area. So majorly for children. Perhaps if there are anybody in the north who has challenges of river blindness, onchocerciasis, epilepsy, we are ready to give them free medical just for children. Yes.
Bless you so much. Thank you so much for that. God will bless you. God will keep you for your great work. Hello, how are you? Great job. What's your name? Where are you calling from? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Okay, my name is Ability. I'm calling from Kuwait.
Ability from Kuwait. Go ahead.
Yes. I really am interested in what you are talking about, but for example, I use myself as an example. I got a land in Benin, about 17 hectares. And my intention was to use it for palm fruit plantation, take it up from there. But you know that I cannot access the place now because of insecurity and banditry.
Wow. Where did you get this land in Benin? Where?
In Benin, in Udo. Yeah, the place is called Udo in Edo State. It's not, let's say, an hour, maximum 1 hour drive away from Benin. So this is some of the things we are talking about. We have leaders not listening. A lot of people have ideas, solutions as to ways we can complete the problem. But how can you come to invest in a place and not able to access the place? Okomo is currently paying heavy for itself, for his own security, in order to sustain their operations. Examples like this, how can somebody have the mind to say, okay, I want to go and put the money there? It's not possible. For me, even the protest that happened recently, I believe one thing all Nigerians everywhere should center their mind is INEC. If INEC gets out of the way and things are done right there, we will have someone who listens. Not someone who fly out with private jet when 20 people are in kidnappers them.
They said they've been released.
Went ahead to buy a private jet.
They said they've been released.
Crying of hunger.
They said they've been released.
That was not listening are here today because of INEC failure, INEC complicity.
The truth is, for whoever are those that manipulated the electoral process, the cost of generations are already on their heads. That's just it. So whoever are those that manipulated and subverted the will of the people, the cost of generations yet born are already on their heads. So I mean, I'm not perturbed. You see how life will go around. You see these things. Don't worry. You see these things. With no mind. Well, my brother. Hello, how are you? Great to have you. What's your name? Where are you coming from?
Good morning.
Yeah, what's your name? Great to have you. Talk to me.
This is why I'm really interested in this your conversation. But my problem is government. What is the government doing? It's not as if we, the youth here, cannot do things to even elevate or bring our country from this mess. What are the policies that the government that is? Like in your station, I came to your station for one export program, something, during Mary. Yes, when I came to after the training, they taught us a whole lot. Do you know we can export charcoal?
Yes, no, I know now.
We can export cow horn. These are things that we joke with here, we play with. We can export cow horns, we can export cow leather.
Yeah. It's just sad. It's just sad. Government's not playing its own role. It's just sad. 088-099-0991. I'm going to wrap up things very soon. It's been a great Sunday. We thank all of you for joining us across every platform possible. And afterwards, I wrap Pop, I'm going to play you an interview I did with Nord Motors. You're going to hear the interesting Nigerian man, speaking about Nigeria, speaking about prospects of the future and development. And there's so much to speak about. There's so much to articulate on, and there's so much to look at. So very much to look out. So we'll just start to wind things down. I'd like to say a big thank you to each and every one of you for your time, for joining us this great morning. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping us elevate the conversations. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. A lot of people are joining us across many platforms. Hello, you're the final caller.
Hello, Mr. Rufai.
Yes, as you were saying.
Okay. So, in what way are this government as in encouraging us? I'm a young guy of like 30 years. We have a team of about 10. We are from Akwa State. We produce palm oil, from the tree of the palm oil down to the chaff. Oh, it's money. These are things that can export Nigeria. Hello?
I'm with you.
These are things that can bring money, that can improve the economy. But what are the things put together by the government? What are the policies that can bring us the youth to bring all these things out of us? There's no one at all. There's no way you can get partnership. There's no way you can get assistance or loans from the government to use and support yourself. There's no.
What do you need? What do you need for you to be able to export palm oil as you speak?
You just need an export license.
Have you been
so? License and your registration.
So how much is the export license going to cost?
The export license is not up to 40,000.
So is it that you can't raise the 30 or 40,000?
There's no way to raise it.
So you don't have 30 or 40,000 as we speak?
I can raise that 30,000, but the major thing there is the CAC.
So can't you do CAC?
I don't have money for that one.
How much is the CAC? How much is the CAC?
It's 90,000 at the last time I checked.
So you need to raise 140,000. That's it, right?
That's it, and we are good to go.
So can you look for investors in your business that will help you raise that amount?
That is the issue now.
So look for now, because also you can't blame the government for everything. Who are you as yourself? Who are you? What's your drive? What's your push? So if you look hard enough, so you're saying you want to do a big export business and you don't have investors that can invest over 100,000 in you. I think if you also go and look, if you look properly, you would see. The Yorubas have a saying, Bojuba Faraba Ledada. Once you look properly, the eyes will see the nose. So you to go and look.
Okay.
It's not everything that's the government.
Okay, if I get that, then what next?
If you get that, then you can start export. So you get investors. It's not every time you have the money. In fact, somebody is saying CAC is 25K. That is not 90K. I don't know who is telling you that CAC is 90K. So CAC is 25K. So who lied to you in the first place?
It's from the training I came now.
No, you don't. You can register a business name or something. So who make your investigation? I just think you have not done your homework, or you just came to blame the government. Easy. When you have to blame the government, we blame the government. But when we have to take responsibility, we have to take responsibility. I just feel you need to look properly. When you look properly and take responsibility yourself, you're not going to say this. You're telling me you want to do export business and you're lamenting that you can't raise 40,000. So you're not ready. But hope you know you will still have to buy the products you export. So when that one comes, is it government that will come and buy that product too for you to export?
I have the product already.
You have the product, and if you have the product, go and if you have the product, then also go and look for the what's it called for to register a business name or something. Get your export license and get exporting. Go at it. It's not every time you blame the government. There are sometimes that it's valid to blame the government, but there are sometimes that you need to check yourself.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, bless you. Yeah. Thank you so much. We need to take responsibility ourselves. We need to take responsibility ourselves. That's about it. Thank you so much, the back end guys, for always doing a great job. Thank God. Really appreciate you, my brother. The back end there. That's about all we can take on the show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Yeah. Dasile, founder of Nord Motors here. We are doing another extensive, exclusive interview with him. Please, can you tell us how you even conceptualized and started Nord Motors? What year did you start it?
Okay, I started Nord in 2016.
See here on Voice of the People, 90.3 FM. People, 90.3 FM.
The passenger cars and the commercial vehicles. So we felt that, I felt that instead of just losing the entire market, why not create vehicles that are affordable and elegant and easy to maintain. So basically, Nigerians want vehicles that they can buy at a good price. But they also want vehicles that are reliable, that are elegant, that are easy to maintain. So I looked at it and I said we can go to different original equipment manufacturers and bring these machines, this equipment to Nigeria and create our own vehicle that would allow Nigerians to drive brand new vehicles at the best price.
So when you started, was it entirely your money or you had to get investors in? I mean, how did all of that happen?
So when I started,
how's the best way to be able to raise capital for starting an auto company?
So when I started, it was entirely my money. At the time when I started, I owned the company 100%. At that time, I felt it was okay, but quickly I exhausted the money within maybe 6 months. So I had to go to a bank first. Most times people actually go to maybe investors, but most investors didn't listen to me at that time. So I went to a bank, and the bank borrowed me some money, which I used to produce the first test unit. And the bank is Sterling Bank. That's why I respect them a lot, and I think that Sterling Bank is the reason why Nord is still standing. So they saw the dream and they loaned us our very first money. And after that, we returned the money within 3 months. And somebody in my church saw me and decided to loan me some money on a profit sharing basis. And from then, some investors came and I sold some little part of the company to them. And that's the story. That's what's been since then.
What are the lessons people should learn before they get investors in? Because you've also been hurt in the past and you're doing business. What are the lessons you learn?
So first things first, get a very good lawyer. Not just a lawyer like some lawyers are lawyers, but some are, like I said, not just a lawyer, a very good lawyer that has the object that understands that they have to serve you and they have to protect you and they have to advise you right. Not just a lawyer who sees your business as a brief to make profit or to earn a living or to pay salaries. Lawyers that know that they will have to advise you the right way. So that's number one, because you need to ensure that you enter into contract. You cannot have any verbal agreement. Every agreement must be documented. Any agreement that is not documented is probably can be denied, which means that it's not there. So that's number one. Number two, you have to understand the end goal. You have to be long term in your thinking. You have to ask yourself, what do I want? What do I want to achieve? And ensure that in your negotiation that objectives are captured, or those objectives are captured.
Have a good lawyer that is even passionate about your business. A lawyer that cares for you. Understand the end goal. When you first started, how difficult was it to make profit? Because profit is another problem.
Well, even till now, we are about 7 years old and we're not yet profitable. So
when you're paying your loans.
Yeah, so we're paying our loans, we're
employing people, paying your salaries.
People, we're growing. So what we're trying to do is to grow and to a point when we have the market share, and from then onwards we would have, because we're also buying equipment, buying things, growing capacity. So by that time we will have the volume. We'll be doing the volume. I think that eventually when we break even, we'll become very profitable quickly. So So that's the plan.
Oh, okay, let's talk about how difficult it is to get market share, because there are many other competitors too. The Nigerian automotive sector is beginning.
Exactly what Nord has done. We've used parts from some of the biggest OEMs in Japan at about half the price. So we are giving you the same. I don't want to mention their brands. We are giving you the same quality as some of the most popular and reliable brands in the world, but we are selling it for half the price. So when you come to the showroom, for example, or when you buy a Nord, when you open the hood or check the brake pad, you are more or less driving a very popular Japanese brand, but you are buying it for half the price. So for us, it's a lot easier for us to gain market share. We just have to get into the room and although I know one or two competitors that are giving us a run for our money, but most times we win.
Another thing I would like to ask you is, how has government supported you?
The government has supported. I have to say that first things first. The support has been there, but we all agree that it could be a lot better. But the support is there, and we just need to let them know that the Executive Order 5 has to be implemented a lot more, and just also remind them that the more made in Nigeria vehicles that we buy, the more jobs will be created, and the more money that will remain in the country. And when more money remains in the country, we are able to consume more. When we consume more, the GDP grows, the economy is better. So,
let me ask you this: can you actually make a presidential car, something for President Tinubu as to speak, that will be bulletproof and world class? Because a Nigerian president needs to drive made in Nigeria car.
Yes, we can. We are hoping that happens. That can happen within months if he wants us to do it. We actually have a design of in Nigeria, like Russia has their own, the US have their own.
So you've actually designed already Nigerian presidential car
that we have in our file.
Can you show me? Can you show?
Well, I don't want to show you.
Okay.
But we have it. It's should be ready.
Let's talk about the African market. How big are you in other African market? What other countries can we see Nord?
We have some customers in Egypt. In fact, our very first export was to Egypt.
Ooh.
I was hoping that it would be more. That if I knew, I would have tweeted it a lot more when it happened. When the customer bought some test units, and I was hoping that they told they're going to buy 20 more. So I didn't want to, because I like to work inside. Someone even wrote it yesterday when we talked about the FRS that Nord likes to work in silence, and that's very true. So I was hoping that when they like it, because I knew they were going to like it, and they ordered the 20, we just talk about how we sold 20 units in Egypt. However, Egypt, went into their own problems. This was in 2021, just after when the world opened up, late 2020. So they went into their own FX issues, even worse than Nigeria actually. And they told us that they couldn't get the FX to pay us. Of course, we can't be paid in Egyptian currency. We don't need it. So we needed to be paid in FX. So we couldn't do the business. So we also have, Nord is quite popular in Ghana.
Okay.
Nigerians who go to Ghana will tell you that they've driven in Nord a lot. So a lot of transport companies in Accra, Ghana use Nord. We also have some customers in Ivory Coast. During the AFCON, some of the vehicles used was Nord.
Was not. So you have tentacles all over Africa.
Yes.
And there's also the story of one of the longest serving transport companies in this country that use FOSA. They use your car. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So FX, one of the they've been existing since 1970 something. Yeah. So one of the oldest transport companies, and about 3 years ago they started using Nord, and since then they haven't stopped using Nord. They are one of our biggest customers. They buy from us So they give us, I call it steady cash flow, because they bought from us 3 years ago and they haven't turned back. They stopped buying other brands. They just always bought our vehicles, and they tell us that our vehicles make them break even faster because we are giving them the same quality as the popular Japanese vehicle and for half the price.
Tell me about your partnership with Unilag and some of the new cars you're having coming up for taxis and all of that.
Well, we went to Unilag because we believe we have a goal, even if not in generation, but we have a goal to dominate the world, the entire world. And as someone who works for Mercedes-Benz in the past, I know the importance of research and development in making cars. So we've always taken R&D very seriously. But we used to do it in Germany and in China. But I think during a conversation with some professors, they gave us the opportunity of doing establishing our research development center in Unilag. And that was really nice. So we built, like you said it, one of the biggest R&D centers in this part of the world for automobile inside a university campus, so that we can tap into the knowledge of the brilliant students and the professors there, so we can create something that the world will make mobility better for everybody, not only in Nigeria, but the entire world. And when that happens, Nord, and by extension Nigeria, will be a world leader in mobility. So so we have, because of that, we're also designing smaller cars that will make taxis very, very affordable, like, you know, the little small cars that will make movement from one point to another in the major cities in Nigeria easy.
And you have CNG and electric cars?
Yes. So we've supplied CNG vehicles to buses, pickups, to the state government, to some transporters. We also supplied now to FIRS. We're also in discussion to supply to other parastatals of the federal government.
So
and also EV. We also supplied 120 units of electric bicycles to the Kano State, in partnership to some entities, in partnership with the Kano State government.
So you also have you can do the models as electric cars if they want?
Yes, we have. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
People are saying, are the cars rugged enough for local roads?
Yes, that's everybody. You can ask everybody who drives a Nord. It's very rugged. Very, 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 very. That's one of the things the strategy initially was to show people that we can build strong cars. And now I think everybody knows. So we're even now trying to show people that, you can do soft cars too. So we're going to do a launch of the new Nord A3 and the Nord A9. And those are going to be soft cars, because I know we've earned Nigeria's trust when it comes to durable, strong cars. I'm sure you ask around anywhere, when you mention Nord, the image anybody has is, a vehicle that is very, very strong.
What scares you the most about the Nigerian economy?
I hope we don't get to the point where hope is lost, we give up. Because if for a country of 200 million people, if that happens, that will be a catastrophe for the entire world, not only for Nigeria or Africa. And we just need to stop that. And like I said earlier, the way to resolve that is to actually find a way to create. There are ways. Some of us have tweeted some of the ways. We have to find a way to improve consumption in
the future. Do you see like an expansion where Nigerians Nord can make trains for Nigerian railway lines and also other mobility?
Well, we're working on making drones and ships. We've not thought about trains for now.
Ships?
Yeah, we're talking about making ships and we started making drones. If you're aware of that, we're making drones. We have drones if people want. We have, and the software was written by brilliant students in Unilag and some staff of Nord. So we have drones already, and but we're also making ships. But for trains, we haven't looked at that yet.
Ships?
Yeah.
How many ships have you made?
No, we've not made. We've made boats.
Boats, okay.
But that's the first step. We're hoping that when the need arises, we can make a ship.
Your manufacturing plant is in Ekpe. Tell us how that's been able to provide jobs and transform people's lives.
So the manufacturing plant in Ekpe can make about 8 vehicles a day. The one in Unilag can make 5 vehicles a day. But you need to ask, okay, 8 vehicles a day, 5 vehicles a day here. That's a combination of 13 vehicles a day. We haven't done 150 vehicle a year before. So it means that at our current capacity, we will exhaust it in just maybe, I don't know, 15 days. You know, so basically we are seriously underutilized. So anytime we're in Ekpe, some of the market women tell me that anytime we're in Ekpe, we create activity because the woman that is selling corn comes, the woman that is selling this there, because we bring a lot of people there. But most times we are done assembly within 2 days or 3 days, and we are gone again for another 4 months. And let me see, I've not said it before. Because of that, we've been robbed there 3 times because nobody is there. So only the security is there, and sometimes they tie him down, and they go in and they rob. So we've been robbed in that place 3 times. So for that reason, we actually moved away a lot of and of course when they rob and say equipment, very expensive equipment were stolen. So we've moved away equipments that are very expensive from that location, because we can only keep it there if we are sure that we'll keep producing. We cannot produce today and we're not there for another 3 months, you know. So we do most of the production in Unilab now.
Thank you so much, for sharing this, and this is going to be a going concern where we keep talking about the great things you and other auto Nigerian, manufacturers are doing. Thank you so much for your time.
Is famous for its poverty, but many people don't know the complete reason why Africa is so poor. While we all have a vague idea such as corruption, colonization or foreign interference, all these reasons ignore why any of these things can happen in the first place. So in this video, I seek to change that. In this video, we will look from the point when African countries were rich and powerful, how over the centuries Africa lost its wealth, and why Africa hasn't been able to crawl out of its poverty while so many other countries and foreign colonies have. And to do this, we need to start in the 14th century, with Eastern Africa connected to the Indian Ocean trade, while West Africa was home to the richest person to have ever lived, a man named Mansa Musa. While many historians throughout history have concluded that Africa barely has any history aside from mummies and pyramids, it is important to remember that for most of history, much of Africa was as well connected to the rest of the world as Europe or Asia. They developed metallurgy that was on par with Europe and Asia, developed complex mathematical theories, and had intricate systems of government such as city-states, kingdoms and empires. So, what changed? Well, in the 14th and 15th century, Africa's prosperity began to fall behind that of the rest of the world. This was because of 2 external forces, the Ottoman Empire and the Western European empires. We will start with the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottomans required slaves, and the way they got their slaves was through war. They would go into villages, towns and cities to capture the men, women and children to be sold as slaves back home. And the easiest and cheapest place to get new slaves was Eastern Africa. And so slave traders were able to earn a lot of money by buying or capturing East Africans to sell them to the Ottoman. This trade continued all the way into the 19th century. Something similar was happening with Western European empires. At first, European traders came to Africa to trade salt in exchange for gold and ivory. Later, Europeans sailed around Africa to go to Asia. As a result, West Africa became an important location for European traders to stock up on supplies on their way to and from Asia. Soon after, Europeans tried going to East Asia directly by crossing the Atlantic, but instead they stumbled upon the Americas. In these Americas, the Europeans set up colonies. And these colonies were supposed to have the same system of government as that of Europe, with nobility, barons, clergy, knights and peasants. But those Europeans had a problem. The Native Americans, who were supposed to become the new peasants, were dying from diseases like smallpox, measles, bubonic plague, and many more. And a dead peasant is an unproductive peasant. So where were they going to find new peasants for American colonies? Well, they found them on the West African slave markets. At the time, West Africa had slavery, but it wasn't the type of slavery we often think of. A slave often had similar rights as non-slaves. Their children weren't automatically slaves themselves, and they were often part of the family structure rather than a separate worker. And so European traders began buying slaves from West Africa. West Africans were happy to sell European slaves because their own gold mines were drying up in the 15th century and they were looking for a new way to earn money. But how do you get new slaves? Well, you go to war for them. Various African countries went to war with their neighbors, captured their citizens, and then sold those citizens to the Europeans. Prominent slaver countries were the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, the Bono State, and the Songhai Empire. From the perspective of African rulers, this seemed like a good deal. They were weakening their rivals while earning lots of money in the process. And so over time slavery changed from a relatively small market where slaves had rights, into a large system of warfare where slaves became property to be sold to the highest bidder. This evolved into a system where slave traders would go to Africa to buy slaves and put as many as they could fit onto their ships. They would then sail to the Americas, where those slaves were sold to work to death in the fields. Those slave traders then bought raw materials those slaves produced, such as sugarcane, cotton, or cocoa, sail to Europe, and sell those raw materials for a profit. In Europe, those materials would be turned into manufactured goods like rum, clothing, or weapons. The traders then bought those manufactured goods and sailed back to Africa to sell those manufactured goods and use the profits to buy new slaves. This was a good deal for everybody except the slaves. The Americans received slaves to use in the plantations, the Europeans received raw materials, and the West Africans received manufactured goods. And the plight of the slaves was not an issue to any of them. While at times Europeans tried taking slaves by force, this always failed because the African kingdoms were far too strong at the time, and so they maintained friendly relations with whichever country was willing to sell slaves. Over the centuries, empires collapsed into civil wars, and the slave traders were more than willing to buy their former slave partners as slaves to be shipped off to the Americas. And so as empires rose and fell, there were always merchants willing to buy slaves. Such as happened in the Kingdom of Congo, which fell apart into various factions. Each of those factions needed weapons and money to fund their war effort, and so they captured slaves from other parts of the former Kingdom of Congo and sold them to Portuguese traders. As the Europeans founded more and more colonies in the Americas, the more slaves could be sold and the richer the trader became. And this trade had a long-term effect on the economies of Africa, both in West Africa as well as East Africa with the Ottomans. Because before industrialization, the economy of a country was determined by the amount of people living in the country. The more people you had, the larger your economy was. And if you had a large economy, then you could have a small portion of your population focus on producing things other than food. In Europe, for example, craftspeople produced all sorts of things from alcoholic drinks, steel, muskets, cigars, and of course that sweet, delicious chocolate. But it took centuries for those industries to fully mature. But in Africa, these industries never matured like they did in the rest of the world. Because in Africa, craftspeople were enslaved. And this had a tremendous impact on the African economies. While European, Asian and American industries kept growing and kept improving, Africa's industries stagnated. And soon they could no longer compete with European and Asian imports, and the African industries became small and insignificant because you could buy better and cheaper products from Asian and European markets. But you might be asking yourselves, why did the Africans go along with this? Well, because they had to. When you have several warlike empires surrounding you, you yourself have to invest in a strong military to protect yourself. But if you put more money in the military, It means there is less money for you to spend on your own economy. So if an African leader realized what was going on, they couldn't invest in industries because they had to protect themselves. And so all the way into the 19th century, Africa's economies were slowly declining because the slave trade slowly destroyed the African economies, while making a huge profit for those who captured and sold slaves. But why did Western Europeans and the Ottomans weaken Africa for hundreds of years? Well, because it was convenient for the people in charge at that time. It wasn't some grand plan, but instead, each government, trader, and company saw an opportunity in Africa to earn profit. This profit came at the expense of African long-term wealth, with most of the people involved probably not even realizing this. And when a particular region becomes weaker, there are always the strong who will exploit the weak. And in the 19th century, 3 major events happened that would solidify African poverty. The first was the end of slavery. All of a sudden, African slave traders were losing customers because slavery was becoming illegal across the world. And this was a big problem for African countries because their economies relied on exporting slaves and importing foreign goods. But now they lost their main source of income. And because Africa had not built up any other industries because of the slave trade, it did not have another source of income with which it could trade with the outside world. So Africans could no longer buy many of the goods and tools they relied on, and as a result, the African economies slowly collapsed in the 19th century. The second major event in the 19th century was industrialization. Europeans and Americans started to outproduce the rest of the world. Africa became insignificant in world affairs by the middle of the 19th century. And many of the stereotypes about Africans, such as that they have no history, no established government, and various racist beliefs, came about in this time period, when Africa had become weak with little to offer the outside world, and the outside world taking little interest in Africa. And then the third major event happened in the 1870s. With Africa's economy in shambles and European industrialization in full swing, Europe, all of a sudden, had the ability to transport vast amounts of heavy materials across oceans. Before, it would not be profitable to transport heavy ores from Africa to Europe because the technology simply wasn't available yet to make it profitable. But steam technology meant trains, steamboats and factories that could transport and produce goods at a profit. And in 1871, the King of Belgium decided that Belgium should have a colony, looked at the world map and noticed that Africa was both weak and available. And so once again, the strong took advantage of the weak. Soon other European nations joined and almost all of Africa was colonized by Western and Southern European empires until Africa looked like this, and like this after World War I. And this had 3 significant results for Africa. The first is the increased poverty. European colonizers cared little for the people living in the colony. Africans were driven out of the most fertile regions to make space for European settlers. Plantations were built for Africans to work and for Europeans to own. And the taxes Africans paid were rarely spent on improving their lives, but instead on continuing their own oppression. The European colonizers were only interested in extracting wealth from their colonies by constructing roads, railroads and ports to transport raw materials to Europe and North America. In essence, whatever wealth Africans had was systematically taken from them and handed over to European settlers. A prominent example is the Congo Free State, where they worked millions of people to their deaths. By the way, if you're curious what the free stands for in the Congo Free State, it meant free of oversight, so the rulers of the colony could exploit the locals without any interference. The second is the infrastructure, which was designed specifically to transport raw materials to their European overlords. The first president of Togo said it quite well. The effects of the policy of the colonial powers has been the economic isolation of peoples who live side by side, in some instances within a few miles of each other, Although I can call Paris from my office telephone here in Lomé, I cannot place a call to Lagos in Nigeria, only 250 miles away. Again, while it takes a short time to send an airmail letter to Paris, it takes several days for the same letter to reach Accra, a mere 132 miles away. Railroads rarely connect at international boundaries. Roads have been constructed from the coast inland, but very few join economic centers of trade. The productive central regions of Togo, Benin and Ghana are as remote from each other as if they were on separate continents. And the third result was that by replacing all the African leaders with European leaders, that Africa was losing vital skills in terms of governing themselves, such as business managers, government leaders, or accountants, as well as practical skills such as mechanics, construction workers, or medical professionals. And that was a problem when Africans started demanding their independence after World War II, when protests, riots, and rebellions popped up across the continent, until the colonizers realized that a few million Europeans simply couldn't control over 200 million Africans if those Africans refused to cooperate. And so between 1945 and 1975, almost every African country became independent. At the time it was thought that if Africans would once again rule Africa, that wealth would follow soon. But this didn't happen. But why not? History has shown us that former colonies can become wealthy countries, such as New Zealand, Ireland, or South Korea. Yet not a single country in Africa is what we call a developed country. And the reason for this is the way in which the colonizers left Africa. Because when people don't have the skills to run a country, when communities don't connect to each other, and when prosperity is already rare, it becomes very difficult for the leaders of that country to bring prosperity to that country. But at the same time, leaders of African independence movements promised the African people prosperity after independence. So, how were African leaders going to fulfill this promise of wealth and prosperity? Well, for most African countries, the solution was an economic system called African socialism. The way this system works is that many industries would be controlled by the national government, such as mining, construction, plantations, etc. It would then use all of the nation's resources to industrialize, because at the time, manufacturing jobs paid higher salaries than farming jobs, and so decided that the best way for Africa to become rich was to replace low-paying jobs in agriculture and mining with high-paying jobs in factories. It made foreign goods more expensive by putting extra taxes on those goods, arguing that if foreign products are more expensive, then people will need to buy goods from their own country instead. The leaders were hoping that foreign investors would come to their countries because those foreign businesses wouldn't have to pay those extra taxes if they just moved some of their factories to Africa. And, luckily for Africa at the time, they gained independence during a Cold War, and so they could receive foreign aid from either the West or the Soviet Union in exchange for being on their side in the Cold War. And while of course every African country had different economic policies, they were all kind of similar to this. But African socialism simply didn't work. First of all, the trade restrictions meant that African countries couldn't sell products to each other, meaning that it was hard to find customers to any products made in Africa. As a result, none of the industries could grow large enough to be able to compete with the industries of North America, Europe, or East Asia. And so nobody else wanted to buy African goods because they could get those same goods better and cheaper from other countries. Secondly, a single large government isn't able to adapt to changes in world markets as quickly as hundreds of take decades before enough qualified professionals would join the job market. And so African countries lacked the people needed to make their countries thrive. The fourth reason why it didn't work is not so much about African socialism itself, but about the continent of Africa. Because Africa's landscape is harsh, with some places experiencing droughts lasting years, such as the drought which lasted from 1968 to 73, causing large food shortages, while other parts have locusts and red-billed koala birds, which make agriculture nearly impossible. The fifth reason was disease. Yellow fever, smallpox, sleeping sickness and malaria are but a few of the diseases which plagued African development. And while smallpox was being eradicated, new diseases were spreading, such as river blindness, where worms live inside your eyes and have become the second largest cause of blindness worldwide. Or take bilharzia, caused by a worm which likes to live in rivers. It infects the urinary tract or intestines, which can lead to kidney failure, infertility, and in children can cause poor growth and learning disabilities. All of these diseases are easily preventable in rich countries with access to water sanitation facilities and modern medicine. But because Africans were poor, they couldn't afford the doctors, clinics and medicine they needed to fight those diseases. And so a combination of trade barriers, inefficient governments, a lack of education, harsh environments and disease meant that this system was doomed to fail from the beginning. There was simply no way for any African nation to reach wealth and prosperity at that time because of the underdeveloped countries they inherited from their former colonizers. But this raises a new question. Why did African countries choose this system in the first place? Well, the reason is that this was a system which they inherited from their former colonizers, where the colonial government controlled nearly every aspect of the colony's economy. And if they wanted to switch to a free market system like Western Europe, East Asia or North America, then they would need business people and entrepreneurs to set up new businesses. But the problem with this is that Africans weren't allowed to run businesses under colonialism, so the entrepreneurial attitude didn't exist. On top of that, due to colonialism, Africans were never trained in modern skills. So if you wanted to open a factory, for example, it would be impossible to find qualified employees who knew how to run the machines and factories. In today's world, we know the answer to this dilemma because we've seen countries like Singapore, Vietnam and China in similar predicaments. But back in the 1940s through 70s, there were no such examples to follow, except for countries like Japan and the USSR, who had gained economic development through strict government control. And so Africa's leaders thought that African socialism was the best way to create wealth and prosperity for their countries. Except those two countries did so through the deaths of millions and already had an educated population when they began their economic development projects. Let's compare this to a colony which did become wealthy after independence, South Korea. They decided to focus on just a few industries such as electronics, agriculture and steel, and only putting trade barriers on those products. South Korea would then trade those products with things it didn't produce itself. As a result, South Korea became a world leader in things like electronics and has become one of the richest countries in the world. But this only explains why Africa didn't become wealthy right after independence. However, after a few decades, Africans would have better education and would be able to indeed set up African businesses using African labor to create African industry. Yet this didn't happen until the 21st century. So why didn't this happen earlier? Well, this has a lot to do with the corruption that emerged after independence. Shortly before independence, most African colonies became democratic, and these democracies were very unstable because they had only been around for a few years in most cases. We still see this today, where recent democracies tend to be the least stable democracies. And most African nations were not at all united. Some countries were lucky in that most people spoke the same language, while other countries had hundreds of different languages, and good luck trying to run a political campaign in over 100 languages. So instead, politicians realized that they could more easily win votes if they targeted specific ethnic groups. As a result, politics was divided along ethnic lines, and African countries became more and more divided with each election in the 1960s and 70s. So now groups of people were not only divided based on ethnicity, but also separated politically based on where they were born. From the perspective of a politician, this made perfect sense. If you want to win votes, appeal to certain ethnic groups. But from the perspective of the country as a whole, it made the country more difficult to govern over time. And if a candidate decided to appeal to the whole country instead of specific ethnic groups, then they would lose elections. And so, through a natural process, African nations tended to become more divided after independence, all thanks to the social and political systems left behind by their former colonizers. A prominent example of where this went horribly wrong was Rwanda, with the Rwandan genocide, where over 500,000 members of the Tutsi ethnic group were massacred along with many other crimes against humanity. Once a party got into power, they would try to keep the power for themselves. Many Africans saw democracy as nothing more than a mess of infighting, with opposition parties abusing their power to hinder the greater national interest. Therefore, a single-party system was created in many African nations in the years following independence by crushing the opposition. And in countries with hundreds of different cultures and languages, it makes sense that you wouldn't want to deal with all of them vying for power. By the 1980s, the elites had taken full control over the political system in most African countries. And so, very little changed after independence, with European elites replaced with African elites. And those new elites were concerned that they would be overthrown in a coup. So, how were they going to keep themselves in power? Well, by taking the money intended for economic development and handing them out as salaries to powerful government officials to keep them happy enough that they wouldn't start a rebellion. But whereas colonies had oversight from their European government, who would fire anyone getting too corrupt, the new leaders had no such oversight. And to show just how incompetent some of these governments are, in the Central African Republic, the government didn't even keep proper records of financial transactions. By 1964, Senegal spent 47% of the government budget on the elites, 58% in Ivory Coast, and 65% in Dahomey, now called Benin. And if outsiders wanted access to African resources, all they had to do was bribe government officials to get access. And so African governments and companies started paying money to the African elites to gain access to the resources rich nations needed to run their own economies. As a result, the elites became richer, while the poor, poorer. So, if you're an oil company, all you have to do is bribe government officials and you can extract all the oil that you want. The elites would get a portion of the profits, while the people would see no benefits from resources taken from their own country. This is a system which is still active in many parts of Africa to this day. And if you're a country or company who does not want to give money to corrupt politicians, then there will always be somebody else who is willing to pay. As a result, anyone who thinks morality is more important than those resources will always be outcompeted by the ones who are willing to pay the bribe. Thus you create a system where world leaders who are willing to pay those bribes will always have an advantage over those who won't pay bribes. And over time, bribes had become the norm in Africa. The Africans were not stupid, of course, and saw what was happening. They would often protest or even start rebellions to stop their own exploitation. But in the 1960s, African countries did not have a strong enough military to keep the peace. So, who did they call upon to restore order? Well, their former colonizers. The French and British in particular suppressed rebellions and protests across Africa in exchange for greater access to African resources. For example, in 1962, French troops broke up fighting in what is now called the Republic of Congo and put down a rebellion in Cameroon. The British meanwhile suppressed mutinies in Kenya and Tanzania. By 1965, these military interventions became common across Africa. From Algeria to Congo, Benin, the Central African Republic, Upper Volta, Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia. all independent countries, and all had European troops stationed there to secure European access to African resources. African nations experienced around 40 successful coups within the first 2 decades after independence, and so Africa gained a reputation for being a very unstable country. So unstable in fact that almost nobody wanted to invest in Africa anymore except for their resources. And this highlights another issue. People think of Africa as a single entity, a continent filled with poverty and war. So when someone hears about, for example, Boko Haram in Nigeria, it is often grouped with the rest of Africa as just being another war in a continent filled with war. Yet what most people don't realize is that the area in which they operate is over 1,000 kilometers away from Nigeria's economic centers and has almost no effect on business. They are further away than Amsterdam is from Warsaw. But companies will still refuse to do business in Africa because of this belief. And this creates a cycle. People group Africa together as a poor continent, resulting in less business, which results in Africa staying in poverty. It is for this reason that throughout this video I have used the words most, almost all or few quite a lot to show that Africa is a diverse area and simply cannot be grouped together in most cases due to this diversity in peoples, landscapes and cultures. Despite all these issues, some things did improve in Africa. By the 1980s, African politics started to stabilize with fewer coups. Primary school enrollment went from 36% to 63%, secondary school from 3% to 13%, life expectancy rose from 39 to 47, and the medical professionals per person doubled. On the whole though, the average African was becoming poorer. However, Africans were receiving better healthcare and education, and this would be very important for Africa by the 1980s. Because in the 1980s, Africa faced 3 major issues. The first was that the infrastructure it did have started to break down, meaning that raw materials became far more difficult to export. The second was that Africans who did receive a proper education decided to move to another country where they would receive a better salary, meaning that Africa was losing its smartest and best educated people. And the third was the fall of the Soviet Union. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union decided to stop participating in the Cold War and focus on its own economy. As a result, it was no longer sending as much money to African allies. In turn, Western countries decided that they were also going to send less money to Africa. So all of a sudden, African leaders no longer had enough money to keep themselves in power with the system of bribes. And so African leaders decided to ask Western nations for financial aid. But this time, those Western nations were no longer interested in giving money directly. Instead, African nations would have to sign loans with rich countries, and in exchange, African countries would have to reform their economies in such a way that it would become easier for companies to do business in those countries. And while various industries were privatized and free markets emerged, most African countries underwent few reforms. And the reason they underwent so few reforms is that African dictators had an idea. They could pretend to privatize their economy by selling the privatization to the highest bidder. Basically, doing what they had been doing for the past couple of decades. Bribes in exchange for access to African markets. So in effect, nothing changed, except that this time Western institutions supported this process by rewarding those dictators through foreign aid packages, making bribes even more profitable. In Nigeria, for example, the government privatized various state-owned businesses, of which 80% of the shares were owned by the leaders of the country. In effect, not changing anything at all. In Kenya, Uganda, Zaire, Guinea and Senegal, they sold government businesses to the friends and family of government leaders. The only businesses which actually saw significant investments were oil and mineral extraction, which, just like in the 60s and 70s, had been sold off to the highest bidder by bribing government officials. As a result, The 1980s is often dubbed Africa's lost decade, and why Africa remained poor until 1989. Because protests were erupting all over the world. The Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Taiwan, South Korea, China, and Africa. Africans were once again protesting their own oppression. And so rich countries decided to switch tactics. Instead of giving money to dictators for fake privatization, they instead gave money to countries who reformed their government to be more democratic. And so dictatorships faced two issues at once. On the one hand, their own people were getting restless, while on the other hand, their income was decreasing. And so the elites allowed for a small amount of reform, enough the people and the rich country removed from power. Democratization spread across Africa, to Zaire, Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Gabon, Cameroon, Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, South Africa, until it spread across the continent. With of course various exceptions. While some governments resisted, such as for example the Central African Republic, most did democratize at least slightly. Each country had their own struggles of course, but in general the continent made slow but steady progress towards democracy. Even today we still see this progress in action in Africa, as elections are often contested and often unfair. Yet it is more democratic than a complete dictatorship. And this process has made Africa more stable and more open for doing business in the early 90s. And now new leaders were in charge of Africa, and these leaders had to fight corruption in order to fight poverty. And by fighting poverty, they could stay in power, as this would earn them votes in future elections. They reduced the government's role in the economy, encouraged growth in the private sector, allowed Africans who were much better educated than in the 1960s to use their skills to develop their country, and attracted investors from abroad. These policies primarily focused on using the strength of Africans themselves, rather than by having policies enforced upon them by the outside world. The African Renaissance can only succeed if its aims and objectives are defined by Africans themselves, if its programs are designed by Africans ourselves, and if we take responsibility for the success or failure of our policies. African countries started to work together more through institutions like the African Union, by reducing trade barriers to make trade between African countries easier, investing in stable governments to make sure that you didn't have to worry about a civil war right across your border, and by creating various agencies to cultivate African talents. And these trends have had an effect in the last 3 decades, with some African countries now being the fastest growing economies in the world. And so we arrive in the 21st century, where history is too recent for historical analyses. However, there are some trends worth noting. Africa is still facing many issues. They are the least prepared for climate change, while probably suffering the most under it. A third of all children are malnourished. A third of children don't finish high school. Extremists find it easy to recruit the vast amounts of poor unemployed young people. Pandemics are common across the continent, with COVID being just one among many, and the economic development of Africa policies to harness the talents of Africans set up their own businesses in a free market which generates wealth by Africans, for Africans, in Africa. For example, take the hyacinth plant, an invasive species on Lake Victoria. African scientists developed a method of turning this invasive species into protein-rich animal feed. This feed is now being sold across the world. In the 21st century, developments like these are creating a fast-growing middle class with rising spending power. This middle class will want to buy more goods to other Africans, which in turn allows Africans to create industries specifically suited for the African market, a market often neglected by rich countries. And while Africa is still in the position where it mostly exports raw materials, it is currently experiencing an economic development that, if it continues, will finally bring an end to the large-scale poverty that has systematically plagued Africa for centuries. Africans are not just hopeful of the future, but for the first time since colonization, are actually gaining the tools that will create this future. And yet, despite all the information in this video, there is a lot which I had to leave out, such as, for example, the disastrous agricultural programs which cause famines in areas with some of the most fertile land in the world, economic successes which eventually failed due to corruption, or the French financial systems linking African currencies to France. I therefore left articles and YouTube videos in the description with more information about Africa, in particular, information written by Africans themselves. If you're from Africa or are an expert on Africa, then please share more information about this topic in the comments. I will heart react ones that provide more information so people can learn even more about Africa. And please leave a like.
Were to an extent satisfied with the status quo, were comfortable with where we are. We're just concerned about how we can just live, eat, take care of our loved ones, and nothing more, right? I really believe that we're called to be more than that. So. Again, we move straight to what purpose is, right? We move straight to what purpose is. Purpose is the reason why something to an extent exists, right? The reason why something exists. And for us as human beings, the reason why we're on earth. I've always grown up with this principle or with this mantra, you live not for yourself alone, but for others. And then when to an extent you have that mantra at the back of your mind, you're knowing that to an extent, you literally should show love to others. Then I move straight to what mission is. So mission to an extent is an important assignment, right? It's either it has begun or it's in process. And as individuals, I always emphasize on the fact that you should see your mission in life as something created, designed and given to you by God. It's literally beyond you. So looking at it, the audacity of mission and purpose, there's one thing that to an extent helps and then guides us towards achieving our best life, and then that's vision. I also refer to some of the words that were always lingering in my head growing up, and then I remembered growing up, and then I have literally the definition of vision at the back of my mind, right? What is vision? Vision is a mental picture of a preferred future. So you might not be literally where you are, you might not be where you want to be, but you literally have a picture of what your tomorrow would look like. And so your joy, your happiness is literally dependent on the fact that you know that there are better days ahead. I wish I could share my slide. I don't know, Amaka, if you're able to get the slides. I think I sent it to your WhatsApp.
I am trying to sort it out. My apologies. Yes, I would get it to you shortly.
Okay, great. So there is literally a Venn diagram. I hope before the end of this session, I'm able to still share it again. So there is a Venn diagram that describes how you're able to figure out your purpose. It's a mix of passion, it's a mix of mission, it's a mix of your profession, and then also a mix of your vocation. So it's you literally sitting down to analyze what are you passionate about, what is your mission. So to an extent, what opportunity do you have in terms of your profession? So for instance, I'm really excited at the fact that Rufai is on this call. So he's literally leveraging his profession to fulfill the assignment that God has for him. And to an extent, it's making making people ask themselves genuine questions, right? You could also find purpose from, are you being paid from either your profession or your vocation? Because in as much as you want to impact lives, I'm on page 6. So in as much as you want to impact lives, you still have to find ways in which it's going to be sustainable, right? How are you going to fund it? So your profession and your vocation could fund your purpose. You could also look at what you're passionate about and then what your mission is. I remembered when I was still in the university, and I knew that just a university education wasn't going to give me the desired future that I needed. Or so then what I had to do was to then volunteer with organizations. I volunteered with the Future Awards Africa. I volunteered with ISEC. I volunteered with a couple of organizations. And the truth is, the relationships had built in all these organizations paved more ways for me when I left the university. So you necessarily don't have to be paid for something, but as long as you have passion in it for it, and then you have a mission, and then you have a vision, you love it, you are great at it, you are great at volunteering, and then the world also needs you to serve effortlessly. So an extent, when you align all of these different verticals, you'll be able to find your purpose. So I expect that a lot of us can grab this and then literally take pen and paper to write all of this down. So I love Grant Cardone. I love reading his books. I love some of his principles on the 10x rule, where you're able to think exponentially. And then I came across this because the days are filled with evil. So just emphasize on making the best use of every opportunity given to you to serve, to work, and all of that. So I'll go to the next one, which is never let a good crisis go to waste. This was one of Winston Churchill's quotes some time ago. And then interpreting it, the next slide. So interpreting it in this current age is, irrespective of what has happened to you, don't play the victim mentality and blame some other person for your problem. Like you literally need to maximize everything that has happened to you, right? So for instance, you're working in an organization and then you're asked that your services are no longer needed. It's nobody's fault. You literally have to sit down and know what went wrong, forgive if need be, and then forgiveness to an extent then opens doors for more opportunities. And irrespective of what happened, you lost a loved one, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? You're down on cash. Think of innovative ways to make money. Next slide.
Okay.
So when we're looking at the powerful principles for impacting your generation and fulfilling destiny, there are different verticals. We're looking at your health, being very healthy. You're looking at wealth, being able to sustain your lifestyle. And then you're looking at spirituality. I'm not a proponent of go to church, go to mass, but be spiritual. Be spiritual meaning that you are serving God in truth and in spirit. You have your values and your principles guiding you. You give selflessly, you meditate and you pray, and you are grateful, irrespective of anything that has happened to you. The mere fact that you're alive is enough to be grateful for. And then when it comes to wealth, you look at education. Are you getting the necessary education that will give you a competitive advantage in this competitive world? Are you learning the skills of the future? The skills of the future are artificial intelligence, data science, programming, software dev, design, different skills that will make you relevant now and in the future. Some internal health challenges, and that's partly because we don't do a lot of checkups and all of that. And then back to wealth, I think relationships is critical to we being able to fulfill mission, because we have to literally be very intentional about building relationships. The next slide. So we're spiritual beings, right? So irrespective of what's happening in the physical, we should also consider the fact that we're spiritual beings. And then we can maximize our potential when we begin to understand ourselves. What is your routines daily? Do you wake up in the morning and just press your phone? Or do you wake up in the morning and just thank God for the gift of life and then plan your day? So you just have to be very intentional about it. The next slide is you're a child of God on a mission to change the world. So you were not born by mistake. You were born to impact lives. You are not born for you to eat rice in the morning and by the night. No, you are born to, you're a child of God on a mission to change the world. And you don't have to wait till you're able to change Nigeria, Africa, and whatever. Start from your immediate community. Start from being there for your friends and your loved one. The next slide is joy comes from an internal state of being. The ultimate source of happiness is within us, meaning that your joy cannot come from the fact that you have a beautiful relationship, you have a great job. All of those are add-ons, right? Joy comes from an internal state of being. And the ultimate source of happiness is within us. If you say you're happy, you're happy. If you say you're sad, you're going to be sad. So depending on what you want your mindset to phantom, you would. And I learned this a lot from Chude Jidanwa, also reading a lot of books from Dalai Lama and the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The next slide, blaming someone or something else may extend. The next one. So blaming someone or something else only extends how long you will be a victim or a slave. That's by Grant Cardone. Don't blame anyone for anything that has happened to you. Don't blame your parents for not giving birth to you in America. Don't blame anyone, because the longer you blame people for your current situation, the longer you continue to be a victim. And then that's literally not great for someone who has the audacity of mission and purpose. So the next slide is we're radiance of God's glory on the earth, right? We are, our bodies are the temple of God, right? Keep it holy, right? God has called you to take over territories for him. And you can't do that if you're not empowered. So if you have an idea in your head, birth it. If you have an answer to a problem, talk about it. If you have answers to difficult questions, talk about it, right? You are the salt of the earth, so add sweetness, and then you're also the light of the world. I could remember some time ago, I was working in an organization, and then my employer were in a meeting, and then my employer said, "No, yeah, you're the light of this company." And I'm like, I was like, no, not because you are fair, you are the light. Even till today, I don't know what he's talking about, but I just go back to the fact that the Bible said, the word of God said, we're the light to the world. So in your individual offices or shops or wherever, you have to be the light, meaning that you have to literally exume grace, and then you only exume grace through your intentional actions. So what is the empowered you? The empowered you, the next slide. So an empowered you is you being able to set goals, do not overspend, save for the future, save for your children. If not, your children will complain the complaints that you are complaining right now. Have multiple streams of income, be faithful, judicious at your full time, but at the same time, still think of how you can add value and people would pay you for it. Be a learning machine, read and educate yourself, avoid toxic relationships, be intentional about your relationships. Success is your responsibility, it's nobody's responsibility, because you literally have to have a mindset that your existence and your survival is based on how you're intentional about your success. You have to live for others, you have to believe in yourself, watch and pray, set audacious goals. 10x what seems impossible to others. It drives you to be focused. The next slide says, okay, after all of this, what is your resolve? I expect that everyone goes back to the drawing board and set goals for themselves. reach goals that seems impossible to others, become a learning machine, because you can't give what you don't have. So you have to constantly keep learning and developing yourself. I mean, the next slide is your resolve. So reach goals that seem impossible.
My laptop, oh yeah, finally gone through. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. So find joy in your journey. Joy. Like, remember what I said earlier, that irrespective of anything that is happening, the fact that you are alive should just make you joyful. And do not be complacent. Do not be satisfied with the fact that you have a great job and then you think that's all that God has told you to do. There is more. All of us on this call, we're on a mission to take over territories, right? And then we do that by building character, staying disciplined, and then being consistent at whatsoever our mind tells us to do. So thank you very much. These are my contact details. I'm very, very much available to help if you need clarity post this session. This number is available just on WhatsApp. And then my campsite bio has some of the books I've written on life principles, on tech skills of the future, and a lot of other things. So I'll give some time for the other speakers to bless us. And then thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much, Noye. Now, don't be too in a hurry to leave. We have some time for reactions. So if anybody has, say, any questions to ask Noye or any contribution to make as well, can I ask that you do that in this time? Do you have any questions, contributions, or was there a particular thing that resonated with you that Noye said that you would like to also probably elaborate on? If we don't have, we could move on to, but I'll just give a few minutes. I'm just keeping an eye as well on the chat section to make sure that
Yeah, hi, can you see me?
Yes, we can. Hi, how are you?
I'm okay, and you?
I'm very well, thank you. Welcome to Empowering Series. It's good to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Good stuff. Okay, so Dele will be speaking to us about my Nigerian dream and identity. Thank you, Noye, for sharing about the audacity of purpose and the audacity of, okay, my apologies, Dele. I'm going to just stall a bit. Someone just asked a question for Noye quickly. Someone asked, Noye, can the first speaker, can you elaborate on life once, I'm not sure if I get this. Can you elaborate more on living one's life? I guess that's what that means. Living one's life for others.
Okay. So thank you so much for that question. So the sentence is live not for yourself alone, but for others. That means you are being all God has called you to be, but at the same time, you are not selfish. You are selfless. Meaning that you're ready to be there for those who need you. You're ready to impact lives. You are ready to make the life of some other person better, not at your detriment. And that's why, to an extent, it's very important for you to fulfill purpose first and then be able to impact lives. Because if you want to start impacting lives, probably by giving when you don't have, both of you might probably sync together. So that's why you literally have to fulfill purpose and then live not for yourself alone, but for others.
Okay, Baba, I hope that clarified or answered your question. In the interim, I think someone wants to add something. Abam, would you like to unmute yourself and just give us your own what else stood out to you? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Noye, thank you so much for your presentation and treading more light on achieving purpose and finding out God's path for our lives. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so in addition to what Noye has said, so in living your life for others, I mean, when we look around God's creation in the universe, nothing lives for itself. The fishes in the sea do not live for themselves. The mango tree does not live for itself. The sun and the moon do not live for themselves. Everything in creation lives for others. When you begin to live for yourself, you begin to die. It means you're no more living a selfless life, you're living a selfish life. And everything about God's creation is selfless. So, in addition to that, one of the things that would tell you if you're on the right path is, what is that thing that arrests your attention? What is that thing that when you go home, other people may pass by it, but it gives you sleepless nights? That is what God has called you to do. Is it children who are homeless? Is it the environment that is in danger or in degradation? Is it a housing problem? Is it a transportation problem? Is it a problem around humanity? Anything at all that gives you sleepless nights, that touches the chords of your heart, that ensures that you lose sleep, that you owe your creator, you would owe your creator an explanation if you do not solve the problem. The same way Nightingale, was it Florence Nightingale, addressed the issues then in World War I that bettered the nursing profession as we know it today. But most importantly, so where people get it wrong is something may be your calling, and you just jump into it. No. So there is process. Mm-hmm. So when God gives you an idea, you need to go to the back of the desert. You need to get the right skills. You need to know what is that thing. You need to get how to get prepared, to launch into that calling. So you can see that even Jesus Christ, who is our example, was first of all a carpenter before he was a savior, because in the environment where he was trained, he needed to do something to feed himself. He needed to do something to save for that ultimate call. Do you get? So you see that David was a shepherd in the back of the desert before he became king. You see that Joseph was a kitchen tender. Joseph was a food provider before he became food provider for the whole of Egypt. And most of the times, these things, our calling happens. The Bible says that he that is faithful in little will be faithful in plenty. So you see that Joseph was always about people and hunger. Anytime his brothers were in way in the woods tending to animals, he would tell his father he needed to go feed them with food. And even though they'll beat him, he'll still go back. After that, he was sold into slavery. When he went to Potiphar's house, they still made him in charge of food, and he did his job excellently. When he went to prison, he was still in charge of food. He did his job excellently, and God promoted him to be in charge of food. So sometimes the calling is around the little things that we do, and once we do them excellently, God gets to promote us. But above all, most of the time we need skill. A lot of people jump the preparation phase and just want to land in the calling. There'll be disasters. So I think that in betting the call, process is important. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abam. Thank you for the insightful contribution. I think what you said that stood out to me is the place of process. Sometimes we forget that we want to go from 0 to 100 real quickly, but life is all about purpose. When also God calls you, he gives you roots. The roots he gives you is for you to be able to stand whatever challenges that would come, to enjoy whatever success, to have the character to enjoy whatever successes that would come. So thank you for highlighting that, and thank you so much, Noye, for the very insightful presentation as well. Now, just moving on swiftly, I moved to Dele to talk to us about the Nigerian dream and identity. Incidentally, I was just reviewing the polls that you have answered, and I see the hunger. 17 of us actually want to build this dream. We want to build this sustainable and impact-driven community for posterity. So that is a good thing. We hope that we can take something from this conversation and begin to actually reflect and come back again when we're called on to begin to do things that are actionable. 2 people don't know, 2 people want to japa, so no problem. We are all good. Dele, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amaka. Thank you for inviting me to this platform. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dele Bakari, founder at Find Worker and tech entrepreneur. So I guess we'll be talking about the Nigerian identity and dream. And by the way, wonderful presentation, Noye, and pleased to meet you again on this platform. Yeah, so for me, I think today, we're really going to be talking about something that has concerned me over a while now, and it has really begun to. It has, started to, I would say get to me, but it's a lot of interesting questions that I've asked myself, and I have been asked, and I've asked people also while growing up. And the questions are, when is Nigeria going to get better? When are we going to have 24/7, electricity supply? When are we going to have good governance? Nigeria has about 10.5 million, children out of school. When are we going to have a good educational system? So there are a lot of interesting questions, and these are questions that, gets me, I don't want to say angry, but I'm bothered because of the state of the nation. So, so I asked myself these questions, and I've been asked these questions, and I've asked people these questions as well. And I'm sure many of us on this call, we've also asked ourselves these questions. We've asked people, when is Nigeria going to get better? When I was growing up, they told us that in the year 2000, we are going to have constant electricity supply. So year 2000 came, I didn't see anything. I don't know, maybe NEPA gave you people light 24/7 in your houses. I don't know, anything is possible. And yeah, so after 2000 left, we were told that 2010 will be better. And 2010 came again, we didn't see anything. So then we moved to Vision 2020, and 2020 has gone. So again, the question is still there. When is Nigeria going to get better? So these are questions that we're asking ourselves. And I just want us to reflect on this question as well, while we're having this discussion. So thinking about the evolution of Nigeria from 1960 that we got our independence, I think Nigeria has really suffered a lot of, should I say, political leadership? Political leadership, because from the independence, we went to the military, era better. But right now, where are we? I mean, what's happening to Nigeria? But then I think to answer that question, we need to answer the question, who is a Nigerian? And I know that being a Nigerian doesn't mean that you only know about jollof rice. I know, because that's the popular subject we all fight over on maybe Twitter or other social media platforms. Who is, jollof rice? Who makes the best jollof rice in Africa? Or, something like that. But the question right now is, who is actually a Nigerian? And of course, a citizen of Nigeria is a Nigerian, but we need to ask ourselves that critical question, that what makes myself or yourself a Nigerian? Is it our tradition? Is it our culture? Or could it be something else, that we all don't know? But one thing I do know is that we as Nigerians are very unique. Let's forget about the geographical location called Nigeria that Lord Lugard and his wife, I think Flora Shaw, gave or named as Nigeria. But we as a people, I think we're very unique. We're very competitive. We're very smart, and we are go-getters as Nigerians. So, but the issue of identity is really a problem, I think, for Nigeria, and I believe that is one of the fundamental issues that Nigeria has: the Nigerian identity. Who is a Nigerian? I know that over time, the government has rolled out different systems to identify people in the country. At some point, we had BVN for bank verification, which is bank verification number. We had NIN. We currently have NIN that people are registering for, to also be able to identify themselves as a Nigerian. But the question is that, becoming successful, or is it successful? I can't answer that question because I don't have the data yet to show that out of the 200 million people, how many people have registered for NIN and all of that. I don't have the data, but the question is that also going to be successful, or is it just another initiative that, just like BVN and the others that have been done in the past? Is that also going to be another initiative that we'll just register for and that will be the end of it? So, but one thing I do know is that the Nigerian identity is tied to the progress of the country. It is tied to the progress of the country because if you want to, for example, plan proper education or healthcare, I want to believe that you need to know the number of people that you are planning, education for or healthcare for. Let's take a community in Lagos as an example. I lived in Yaba, so I'll use Yaba as a case study, for example. So in Yaba, we have a certain number of people living in that area. So if the local government, for example, wants to plan healthcare, education, and a lot of this infrastructure and everything in that area, I'm sure they will do census to know the number of people that are living in that area. And how do you determine the number of people in that area if there is no record to show that you have this number of people entering into the community and a certain number going out of the community? So there is no data showing, people coming into the community and people leaving the community. How will the local government, for example, know that Dele has left this local government and he has moved to Surulere, or he has moved to, another city, or should I say area in the Lagos, state itself? So everything ties back into the identity of a Nigerian, and this goes across all the states as well, not just the cities, but it goes across states. For example, if you leave Lagos State to go to Yobe State, how would they know that, okay, this person has left to go to this other area in the state? And I'm not sure if bosses track all these things, but the point is there should be a way for government, to identify people, whether they are in their areas or they are in anywhere, across the country. And all of these things they go back to the infrastructure, how we plan infrastructure, how we plan healthcare, how we plan education, how we plan a lot of these things. I don't know how they usually budget or they plan budgets, our yearly budget for different communities. I just think it's just vibes. I think personally that, they probably just make census and they just put it out there, because how do you really track the number of people living in your area if you don't have that data? So everything ties back to identity, because when you know the identity, or when you know the number of people living in a certain area as a government, you'll be able to plan, accordingly for those people. You'll be able to plan healthcare, you'll be able to plan education, you'll be able to plan infrastructure and many other things. Even crime, if somebody should, let's say, for example, the local government just finished or completed a road, and somebody goes there to take something, how do you identify the person that has just